Okay, well, happy Monday, and I hope you guys are doing well. Thank you guys for showing up, for you guys coming here, and for those of you who are watching the video, I hope you guys make it to class someday. Okay, before we get into, well, I think today I was going to talk about the kind of the final project. All right, so this was something that was mentioned in the syllabus, and I hadn't given any details about it. So I'm going to start giving details about it now, just because I want you guys to start thinking about it. So all of the information about the project is in the module. It's in its own separate module under Project Info. Okay, so go under Project Information, and right now I just have the requirements and guidelines and the proposal meeting rubric, grading rubric, and then I'll kind of I have to fix and edit up the kind of final report grading rubric, but you'll see that. So if you go to project requirements and guidelines, this will be the document. Let me just blow this one up a little bit bigger. And then we'll work through this. And if you guys have any questions along the way, please ask your questions. All right, so the purpose of the project is to give you, the students, just a little bit of, I guess, real life experience with data analysis. The point of the project is to give you a chance to first kind of explore and think about the data before attempting to fit a predictive model. So you're going to fit some kind of model at the end, a predictive or maybe an explanatory model. But the modeling part is worth only maybe a small chunk. Okay. So the total project is worth a quarter of your final grade. Okay, your final course grade. This final project is worth a big chunk, right? You can think of it kind of instead of your final exam, you have a final project. We have a midterm exam during week 6, but then you'll have your final project, and this is the final the final method of evaluation here. Okay, you're gonna have 3 parts. You're gonna have a proposal meeting, and you will be graded on your proposal meeting. You're gonna submit a report, and then you'll make a presentation to me. Okay. And so, and then that report is broken down into 3 subsections. But basically, this week, I want you guys to get yourselves into groups of 3 to 4. I don't know if you guys want time today to just talk to some of the other students here, but then that also and then everybody who is not here today, they'll have to just figure out their groups on themselves or something. Okay, but you could expect to meet with your groups pretty regularly. I would say at least 1 to 2 hours each week for the first kind of few weeks 5 to 8 and stuff. And then during the last couple weeks, weeks 9 and 10, you'll probably have to meet quite a bit. Okay, and if some of you have different availability, some of you are working jobs and things like that. So you need to communicate all of that with your group, and make yourself available for a few hours. Okay. All right. So anyway, groups. I would like them to be established by the end of this week, but at the absolute latest, they need to be established by Wednesday, week 5. I'll kind of have a form where you guys will basically inform me of who's in your group, and then after Wednesday, I'll check, and then whoever's left over, I'll just kind of throw into some arbitrary group. Okay, it's probably not going to be a great group. Okay, these are all people. The people who get thrown in the arbitrary group were all people who didn't take the initiative to find a group. So not to say there's a cause and effect relationship there, but usually, I don't know. Okay, well, I know it's awkward, right? It's awkward talking to people that you've never met or people you don't know and getting yourself into a group. It's a little bit tough, but you got to do it. I think yeah, if we have time today, maybe we'll do this. Or I could wait till I can give everybody a heads up so they all come on Wednesday or something. Okay. CampusWire has a chat room feature that I would suggest to use for kind of your group communication and stuff. And then you can also loop me into the chat room and ask questions about that. And then, you know, I hope there's no drama in your group. Okay, I hope. But if you kind of do most of your communication in the CampusWire chat room, you know, I can also check it out to see, you know, if it's kind of like, you know, this person's in our group and they've done nothing, I can kind of check the chat logs and be like, oh yeah, it's true, they have done nothing, and they'll get a talking to, okay? And perhaps, I don't know. I hope I don't have to deal with that, but you know, that is that's also part of the job, is kind of managing things. So, okay, so let me talk about this proposal meeting, and I started requiring this after, you know, my very first year doing a project like this. I got a bunch of final projects that were like bad, and I was like, and I didn't know how to grade them because, you know, it's worth a large part of their final grade, but they were just bad, and it was because they picked a bad data set. You know, you pick a bad data set, like all of your analysis is going to be bad, okay? And so, so during 6th week, so that's basically 2 weeks from now. So this week, establish your group, start thinking about data. Next week, try to iron out, you know, figure out, you know, the data set you're going to use, and then you'll tell me during 6th week, and I will either give you an approval or I will kind of deny your petition and make you find a different group, okay? And basically, you're going to meet with me for about 20 minutes long. I'll set up kind of like a calendar on Zoom, or like kind of these signups, and then, you know, you'll meet with me on Zoom and you'll kind of tell me what you're thinking about, okay? And basically, during this meeting, you're going to tell me what data you're going to analyze, okay? And you're going to tell me what it is you plan on looking for and things like that, okay? So when it comes to what kind of data you want to use, there's, you know, any data. I'm pretty okay with pretty much any data set out there, okay? I would say the minimum number of observations in your data set, I picked an arbitrary number, but I've said 40, okay? I just don't want it to be such a small data set where the analysis is going to be trivial, okay? I would say an ideal number is probably a couple hundred to a couple thousand. So that's about, I would say that would be the ideal kind of data set size. You can choose to work with a larger data set. So there's lots of, if you go looking out on the internet, there's lots of data sets, some with hundreds of thousands, some with millions of cases, right? So if we're thinking about a table. So in my mind, your data sets are generally going to be contained in maybe one table, maybe a couple tables that are linked to it, right? So you think about like the New York City flights data set. You've got one large table of all the flights, and then maybe you have a couple supplementary tables that will tell you what the airport codes are and what the flight carrier codes are and things like that. So that will be that, okay? But I'll warn you, if you choose to work with a really big data set, and I would say, you know, anything over 100,000, you know, it could complicate matters. It's fine. There's no rule against it. You want to work with a big data set, you know, go for it, okay? And then, but, you know, it might make your life a little bit harder, okay? You got to include a link to the data, right? the data that you pick has to be a subject about which someone in the group is knowledgeable or at least highly interested in, okay? So there is a popular data set. It's this wine data set on Kaggle. If you're going to choose to analyze the wine data set, somebody in the group has to be like a wine enthusiast, okay? Maybe not, I don't know how much of an expert any college student can be on wine. I don't know. But I imagine this would not be an appropriate data set for most of you, okay? Because I think a lot of you are underage as far as alcohol consumption goes. And, as far as those of you who are able to drink wine, I don't know if any of you are wine experts, okay? So it's not, it's a popular one because, they have all of these measurements and stuff, but, can you explain the difference between a Merlot and a Cabernet? And I think that's it's not like super hard, but it will distinguish between someone who has no idea about wine and somebody who has a little bit of idea about wine, right? So this next part is also really important because, again, this was a reason why some of these data sets or projects my first year was, they were bad, okay? The data has to be real data and not a simulated or artificial data set, okay? So sometimes there will be like data sets, but it's just like people made up the data, okay? Or they simulated it using the computer. That will not yield an interesting project, okay? So when you find like a file, okay, make sure there's a description about like where this data came from, like when was it generated or when was it collected, right? Was it collected in the 50s or 70s or the 2019 or 2010? Who knows, okay? And make sure it's not simulated, right? And depending on when this data was collected, right? So there's like some data sets that were collected in like the 70s and stuff. And yeah, it reflects maybe some problems, okay? There's like a housing data set from the 70s, and they consider race in there in this very problematic way. And if you just kind of treat this as like, oh, this is data, blah blah blah, without thinking about how was this data collected, who did the collecting, and why did they include this troubling race column in there? If you don't think about that, your analysis is going to be limited, okay? So anyway, read through the data description, and if there's no data description as like how this, that's probably a sign that you shouldn't use the data set, okay? There should be some description as to what the data is, right? And basically, when during the meeting, I'm going to ask how many variables, like how many columns are there, and I'm going to ask you to explain what each of these columns are, what they mean. All right, you should be able to explain how the values were obtained, when the data was obtained, who obtained the data. You should know if the data was obtained via scraping the web, that exists, okay, or if it was reported by some agency. If applicable, you should know if they are self-reported values or if they were measured by someone, right? So if it was like a survey and it says like, so recently there was kind of this, there's this thing with Facebook, right? And it talks about its effect on teenagers, body image issues and stuff. A lot of that data is self-reported. Okay, so they surveyed people, and then the users self-reported how they were feeling, which comes with its own set of biases versus like going to a psychologist or psychiatrist who does a proper evaluation and says, okay, this is, maybe a slightly more formal evaluation, okay? You got to explain every column that you plan on using, and if you're not able to explain what the values mean for a particular column, you must not use that column in your analysis, okay? And so here's an example. Here's an example of a problematic data set, okay? Because on the surface, it looks good, but there's some issues with it, okay? So it's called graduate admissions, and it says this data set is created for prediction of graduate admissions from an Indian perspective. So they're looking at numbers for I think either from students or universities in India, and so they have certain things like GRE scores, TOEFL scores, university rating, statement of purpose, and letter of recommendation strength, undergraduate GPA, research experience, and chance of admit. Okay, and it's got this thing, right? And it says this data is inspired by the UCLA graduate data set. Test scores and GPA are in the older format. Blah blah blah. Okay, and so you have GRE score, TOEFL score. That's fine. University rating. Just as out of 5. So this is, I don't know what that means. Is 5 good? Is 5 bad? 1 good? I don't know. Okay? It's hard to, so I'm not quite sure. Statement of purpose, who does the evaluations, right? When this person gets a 4.5 on their statement of purpose rating, like, who made that evaluation? Did you write that? Did the person, like, somebody put in this data, right? So who came up with this number? You get a 4.5 and you get a 4. Is this like, so GRE and TOEFL, those seem like, okay, you have an agency, you take a test and you get back a number, right? But as far as I know, there's no agency where you submit a statement of purpose and they come back and they give you a score on your thing, right? That'd be nice for if you're applying to grad school. Or like, can you imagine like right before you were applying to UCLA, if there was like a place where you could just be like, here's my thing, can you read my essay? And then it comes back and it says, you get a 5, and you're like, yes, now I will get in. No, it was just kind of like, you got to write your thing. So I have no idea where this number came from, right? And so, a student said, hey, we want to use this data set. And I just kind of pushed them a little, like, how'd you get this number? Where did this come from, right? Where did these come from? Who gave the letters of recommendation a rating, okay? That's not something that gets rated, okay? GPA, sure, maybe, I don't know, this... Maybe India uses a 10-point GPA scale. I don't know. I'm not familiar with grade point averages of places outside the U.S., so I'm not quite sure. Or maybe they took maybe the conversion is you take the American score and you multiply it by 2.5. I don't know, right? 4-point scale. All right, research 0 or 1. That seems pretty explanatory. But then chance of admit. Where did this number come from, right? How do we know that this student has a 75% chance of admission? Or this student has a 68% chance of admission? Like, it's not like this student applied to 100 schools and got into 68 of them, or applied 100 times and got in 68 times out of 100. So how did we come up with this number, right? And basically, the more you think about this data set, I think the more you realize, like, you can't really explain where some of these numbers are coming from. Okay? And that's a problem, right? If you're going to do some kind of project and you can't explain what these numbers mean, in my opinion, that's an issue. Okay? There's another data set out there, just kind of giving you a warning. I think there's like a Spotify data set. Let me see. Okay, because it sounds like, oh yeah, this seems interesting. And they took like a bunch of songs. Okay, and they took a bunch of songs and I guess and they gave it different things, and there's different genres and stuff. But I have no idea what these numbers mean. Okay, so they rated the songs and they gave them a score on danceability, energy, key, loudness, mode. Like, these are kind of like, okay, so these are qualities of music: speechiness, acousticness, instrumentalness, liveliness, and valence. Okay, I understand these words as a concept, right? Like, if you say, okay, this song is acoustic, I know what that means, right? And if you say, this song has high danceability, sure, I can understand what that means, right? This song has high energy, okay. But if you ask me, all right, is this song has a energy of 0.893, and this song has an energy of 0.365, and I said, well, do you know how this number came about? I have no idea, right? Like, I can play a song and I could say, hey, do you guys think this is high energy or low energy? And we could probably come to some agreement. But if I say, give me a decimal value representing energy, or give me a decimal value representing danceability, or give me a decimal value representing speechiness or acousticness, I think we would have a real hard time figuring that out. So I have no idea. You know, the concept is cool, but I don't know. I don't know what these numbers are, right? Like, I don't know. Okay, so, and instrumentalness is a weird thing, right? Zero instrumentalness, sure, that means somebody's singing or during the thing. But then I would think instrumental would be like either somebody is singing, so it's not instrumental, or nobody is singing, and then it would be instrumental. So what does it mean to have an instrumentalness of 0.33? I don't know, okay? So anyway, these are just questions that I want you guys to be asking yourself when you're looking for a data set. I want you to ask yourself, hey, can I explain the number that appears in this cell? Not just, what is this column, right? Because all of these things will have some kind of column description. But can you explain why this thing has this number, okay, in that column? Okay. So, all right, does that kind of make sense? I realize I guess I have a lecture viewing quiz going on also. Okay, lecture view quiz, although I'm just kind of explaining, well, just, are you paying attention? Okay, letter D is the first one. First one is the letter D. First one's the letter D. Okay, we don't have to worry about the written report just yet, but at least this is, we'll go through it so you have an idea of like what to think about as you're working on it, right? So basically, you're going to write your report as an RMD file. You'll knit it to PDF, kind of a lot like your homework. And you'll put all of your explanations in there. You'll put in any kind of supporting code, any kind of diagrams and charts. That will all be part of your written report, okay? The audience of your written report is someone who, basically someone like me, okay? I will have theoretic knowledge, technical knowledge, all right? I'll understand how data analysis works and machine learning works, okay? But don't assume that I have the same background knowledge of your data, right? So I've got a little bit of background knowledge about like several subjects, but I probably won't have a deep background knowledge on something, right? So for example, somebody, one group, they did I would say a very good data analysis. It was on League of Legends. They found this League of Legends esports data set, and although I'm familiar with what it is, I had no idea what any of the details or the mechanics of the game. So that information needed to be explained to me, and thankfully the people in the group were very were very much experts on the concepts and stuff, and they were able to provide a good explanation. Okay, and able to explain, you know, what each of the columns and the values and stuff meant. Okay, so anyway, in your data report, you need to include background information, right? This part's worth 50 points out of kind of the 200 points for the report. You'll provide background info. That should cover basically all the general information about the subject, so that someone who's unfamiliar with the topic, possibly me, will understand basically what the data covers. All right? And if there's any kind of common knowledge that's known for people who are familiar with the subject, that also needs to be explained in detail. Right? You don't need to include information that's not going to help me better understand the data. Right? So there could be like technical aspects and all sorts of things, but it's kind of like that's not part of the data that we're looking at. You don't need to explain it. Right? There should be an explanation every variable. Okay, and maybe if there's other studies that have already been done, you can kind of talk about those. I would say that's not as important. Okay, actually, and it says in very important weighted equally as the data modeling actually is weighted heavier. Okay, and it's something that can't be just, don't write like 3 paragraphs and think you're done. Okay, this section is probably going to be 700 to 1,000 words. Okay, I'm not going to do a word count, but there needs to be a thorough discussion. Okay, so for example, if you were to do an analysis on a baseball batting ability data set, okay, so in baseball you have, when you look at tables of data, there will be a batting table and a pitching table generally, okay? And I think you guys have experience with this when you did homework 2, right? There was a batting table, there's a separate pitching table, things like that. And basically, as far as batters go, the ability to hit the ball is kind of the key driver in a player's value. That's going to be kind of the most important aspect, right? So there's lots of variables in that table, right? There's things like stolen bases and caught stealing and things like that. Those, I would say, are not as important as the player's ability to get a hit or get on base, okay? So those variables are more important, okay? And whereas for pitchers, the ability to kind of prevent the other team from hitting the ball or getting a hit is important to their team versus their batting ability. So pitchers will still be included on the batting table because pitchers still do have to bat, but they will have really bad numbers. And so during your batting data analysis, you might say, hey, let's remove all of the pitchers, right? With the exception of, say, like Shohei Ohtani, who's a pitcher who is really good at batting too, right? And so they're going to be there, but you might want to remove them from the rest of the analysis. You might want to do a separate analysis or something like that. Okay. All right, and then you'd probably have to explain what all of these variables are. What's a hit? What's a base on balls or a walk? Or what's a batting average and on-base percentage? What's slugging and all of these things? You'd explain what's an observational unit and what the columns are. How are these data collected? And basically, it's officially recorded every single game. Every time there's a baseball game, there's a team of people who just, their entire job is to write down what each player did and how many strikes they got and things like that, okay? All of those, every single play, the information is recorded by somebody. And they now have cameras that look at the pitcher throwing the ball, and the cameras record the exact speed and trajectory and spin of the ball, and you can actually plot in 3D kind of the actual path that the ball takes and things like that. And so it's very advanced and things like that. That's not part of most tables, but you could, if you paid money for it, you can get access to the PitchFX data and things like that, which, if you work in baseball, you'd want that, okay? And then there's common knowledge. Like if you're a follower of baseball, you would know things like there's 30 teams in 162 games, batting average over 300 is good, things like that. Because those could play a role in stuff like that, right? All right. If we're only looking at batting data, we wouldn't have to include data on, say, pitching or things like that, or include that kind of stuff, right? Okay, and then as far as the exploratory data analysis, you've learned a lot of the tools necessary for this part already. Things like creating graphics, that's an important part of exploratory data analysis, and then calculating summary statistics, right? So you've learned the group by and dplyr and mutate, and you're able to take these different variables and try to say, hey, what if I grouped it by this, right? Do people who, do, I don't know, batters under age 27 have better or worse performance than batters over age 27 or something like that, right? You can start asking questions, and start doing exploratory data analysis, all right? And so what I want, and this is a skill that I want you guys to develop, is I want you guys to be able to ask questions that make sense and then do the thing necessary to at least get a hint at the answer, right? Maybe answering the answer right away is hard, okay? But maybe you can start asking questions, right? So if we're talking about baseball, perhaps you want to know, is a baseball player's performance related to age? And maybe the answer is yes or no, or maybe the answer is only after a certain point or things like that. Obviously, baseball players retire at a certain point, meaning they don't play forever. But some people play for a long time, right? Like some pitchers will play baseball for many years and things like that. And so if you have a question like that, during the exploration, you should probably start asking things like, okay, what is the relationship between age and this variable? What's the relationship between age and this variable? Does it change for players who are pitchers versus players who are outfielders or infielders, things like that, right? So these are all kinds of, you have this overarching question, and then you start looking at it from different kind of facets, different kind of aspects, and start searching for kind of these answers. And then what you reveal in the exploratory data analysis, you can further explore in the kind of the modeling part. What I don't want is just kind of some arbitrary, like, hey, let's throw some variables into a table and see what pops out, okay? Or let's just do some arbitrary thing with no kind of direction. This exploratory data analysis, you should have a discussion as a group and work together. It's, I don't know if it's okay, but maybe I'll show you some examples of past reports that were either good or bad. And so there was a group, and I docked them heavily because it was very clear that they did not work together at all. There's a group of 4. They found this Olympics data set, data from the Olympic Games. It was a very good data set, and the potential for a really great analysis, but the group didn't work together, and it was very clear that they just said, hey, I will do this sport, I'll do this sport, I'll do this sport, I'll do this sport. They went their separate ways. They each do just totally different analyses, and then they just copied and pasted them together. And there was kind of no flow whatsoever. It was just kind of like, in swimming, I noticed this difference between men and women. And then in track and field, these events came up with these numbers and these events, you know, and or these countries did well. And it was just kind of like everything was just very different. And it was very clear, and I just said, hey, it looks like you each picked a sport, you did your own separate things, and then copied and pasted together. And they were like, yeah, that's pretty much what happened. And it's very clear. And so, you know, I would say perhaps the question could be, you know, are certain countries more dominant in certain sports, right? Like Jamaica has a long history of being very dominant in track and field, okay? So you think of like Usain Bolt and that there's kind of this almost, there's like a cultural thing where track and field is the kind of the sport of national pride in Jamaica. So and the question is, does that kind of exist for other places, right? So, you know, if you think about, you know, the United States, basketball and American football, we're really good at that, okay? We're also good at baseball, but there's countries like Japan is also very good at baseball, because that's these sports that, you know, so I think there's definitely things, right? And then, you know, if you think about like Sweden and Norway, you know, they're good at like the Winter Olympics, right? There and things like that, right? So you could start off with kind of this question, and then you can direct all of your analyses around that central question. So anyway, that's the exploratory data analysis. Do summary statistics, right? Group it by things and find out the average this or the mean that or the number of this or that. You know, create your graphs and charts, all of these things. Okay, all right, I'll give you your second view quiz answer today. B for bear is your second view quiz answer. Okay, and the last section will be on data modeling as far as the report goes. Data modeling is where you'll fit either a predictive model, maybe an explanatory model. And we haven't really talked anything about this yet, right? We haven't covered any kind of machine learning topics and stuff. And so we'll discuss this more as the course goes on. But basically, based on what you find in the exploratory part, you'll try fitting a model here that, you know, says, can we make predictions or can we find some kind of relationship there? Okay, and then we'll have the final presentations. Okay, so final presentations we'll have during week 10 and 11. And I'm debating if we want to do the presentations in class or if we want to have kind of private meetings or something. I don't think we'll do it during class. So, yeah. Basically, you'll schedule like a 50-minute session with me, and it'll just be me and your group for 45 minutes. You'll do a presentation for your presentation with slides and stuff will probably be somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes, okay? And then the rest of that time, I will ask you questions, okay? But during that 5-10 minute presentation, you'll have slides, you'll talk about them, you'll explain things, and it should summarize stuff, okay? And I'll grade you on things like clarity, concision, and content, okay? And then after your 5 to 10 minute presentation, the rest of the time, about 30 minutes or so, 30 to 40 minutes, I will read through the written report and I'll ask you questions as I'm reading through it. And I'll ask you basically what each team member did. I'll ask you about the assumptions you made during your thing, you know, and why you chose this or what you found. And you should be able to defend the decisions you made. And that will also be the time where I grade you, okay? So at the end of your 45-minute thing, after the presentation and after I read through your whole report, I will give you a final grade for your project. And that will be that, okay? Does that kind of make sense? Do we have any questions? How this should work? Okay, well, I'll give you your last view quiz answer then. Last view quiz answer is A as in apple. And how many people do we have here? We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, we have about 20. So we're missing about a third of our class. But for those of you who are here, I guess I'll give you some time and you can turn to your neighbors or walk around and see if you want to form a group, or maybe you know of a classmate that you kind of want to work with or might want to work with, and you can say, you know, I plan on working with so-and-so, or I might work with so-and-so. You can try texting your classmates or whatever, see if they want to be in a group with you. And well, why don't I let you guys take the remaining class portion to try to figure out groups of 3 or 4, and then you can go from there. Yeah, question. So, well, actually, I'll go ahead and I'll end the video here. And if you're online and you missed out on class, you know, I guess we can have some extra time to find groups in the future. Okay, but we'll end here.